Rain traced crooked lines down the bus stop's glass shelter, each drop glistening beneath the weak yellow streetlight. The girl sat curled on the bench, arms wrapped around her legs, chin buried in her knees. Her thin dress clung to her damp skin, and her bare feet pressed against the cold cement. She had nothing. No money, no belongings, not even the will to wait for a bus she couldn't afford. People had passed her earlier in the evening, their glances sliding away as though she were invisible, just another shadow in a city that had too many. Her body trembled, not just from the night chill but from the gnawing hunger that had lived in her for days. She tried to focus on the hum of tires on wet asphalt, the faint smell of exhaust, the distant chatter of strangers moving somewhere she wasn't invited. It was easier than listening to the silence inside herself, the echo of everything she'd lost. Then, a sound broke through the rain, a voice, small and hesitant. "Can you be my mommy?" The girl lifted her head, startled, her breath catching in her throat. Standing a few feet away was a boy, no older than 6, with cheeks flushed pink from the cold. His jacket was too big, sleeves falling over his small hands, and his shoes didn't match, one red sneaker, one gray boot, both soaked through. He clutched a stuffed rabbit, its ears frayed and limp from years of being carried. His dark eyes were fixed on her, filled with a mixture of fear and hope so raw it made her chest ache. She blinked, uncertain whether her mind was playing tricks on her. A child, alone at this hour. She rubbed her eyes, but he was still there, waiting, his question hanging in the damp air. Her voice came out hoarse. "What did you say?" The boy stepped closer, careful, like approaching a stray animal. I don't have a mommy," he whispered. "I thought maybe you could be mine." The girl felt her throat tighten. Of all the things she had expected to hear tonight, another sneer, another stranger telling her to move on, this was not it. She wanted to laugh, to tell him he was mistaken, but her lips wouldn't form the words. Instead, she found herself staring at him, noticing how his hands trembled as he hugged the rabbit, how his shoes squelched with water, how alone he looked in a way that mirrored her own. Slowly, she extended her hand, hesitating as it hovered near his hair. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The boy shrugged, his small shoulders lifting. "Because you look lonely, like me." Something inside her cracked, a wall she had built to survive all the nights like this. She pressed her hand gently to his damp head, feeling the warmth of his scalp beneath the chill. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into her touch as though it were the most natural place in the world. Her throat tightened. "Lonely," she repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. The boy nodded. His eyes, so large and earnest, held none of the guarded suspicion she had come to expect from strangers. He spoke with the kind of certainty only children possessed, a certainty that made her chest ache. "You were sitting all alone," he said softly, "and nobody saw you. Nobody talks to me either. I thought maybe if we're lonely together, it won't feel so bad." She stared at him, the shiver in her body no longer from the cold but from something raw, something stirring beneath the ruins of who she once was. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she was not the kind of person who could be anyone's mother, least of all his. But his tiny frame, his rain-soaked jacket, the way he clung to that battered stuffed rabbit as if it were the last anchor in his world, those things silenced her excuses. Her hand finally settled on his head, fingers threading through his damp hair. It was coarse, tangled, but undeniably warm. He leaned into her palm, sighing in relief as though he had been waiting for this touch his whole life. Something inside her cracked wider, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the jagged edges of tenderness. "Where is your home?" she asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. The boy pressed his lips together. For a moment, he didn't answer, only hugged his rabbit tighter. Finally, he whispered, "I don't know." His voice quivered on the last word, and he quickly added, "But it's okay. I've been fine. I get cold sometimes. And hungry." The girl's stomach twisted. She knew that hunger, knew the ache of cold settling into bones too thin to fight it. To hear it echoed in a child's voice was unbearable. She wanted to tell him he shouldn't be here, shouldn't be alone, but the words caught in her throat. After all, wasn't she here too, alone, abandoned by the world in the same way? The boy shifted, reaching for her hand. His small fingers curled around hers, damp but steady, grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. "You don't have to be lonely anymore," he said with quiet conviction. "Not if you're my mommy." The simplicity of the offer undid her. No grand promises, no impossible expectations, just a child's belief that two broken pieces could fit together. She exhaled shakily, her breath clouding the cold air. A bus growled as it approached the stop, its headlights washing over them in harsh white light. She glanced at it, then back at the boy. The doors opened with a mechanical hiss, inviting her into a warmth she hadn't felt in days. But the boy's hand clung tighter, his eyes searching hers with wordless fear. She shook her head. The bus doors closed and it rumbled on, vanishing into the wet night. For the first time in years, she had chosen not to leave. And as the boy's small body leaned against her side, she realized she no longer felt like nothing. His words, "Because you looked lonely, like me," had become something else, a fragile thread binding two shadows together. The sound of the approaching bus rolled through the rain-soaked night like distant thunder. Its headlights cut long, bright beams across the slick pavement, and the girl felt her stomach twist. She hadn't ridden a bus in weeks. What money she once had was long gone, and even if she could climb aboard, she would have nowhere to go. Still, the hiss of the engine stirred something familiar in her, the instinct to run, to keep moving, to vanish before the world could expect anything of her. The boy stood close, his stuffed rabbit pressed to his chest, eyes wide as he watched the glowing vehicle approach. His hand slipped into hers then, sudden but sure. His fingers were small and damp from the rain, but his grip was steady. For a moment, she froze, stunned by the warmth that surged through her arm at the simple contact. She looked down at him. His gaze wasn't on the bus, it was fixed entirely on her, as though waiting to see what she would choose. The bus squealed to a stop, its doors opening with a hiss. Warm air and faint chatter spilled out, a reminder of another world, the world of commuters, workers, families going home. A world she had once belonged to, before everything had slipped away. Her heart pounded. She could climb on, leave the boy behind, disappear into the blur of city lights. It would be easier, safer. He wasn't her responsibility. She had nothing, and nothing to give. But his hand tightened around hers. She swallowed hard, her throat aching. She turned her head and looked fully at him, really looked. His wet hair clung to his forehead, his cheeks were flushed from the cold, and his mismatched shoes squelched with every shift of his weight. But his eyes, those eyes, held something she hadn't seen in years, trust. Not suspicion, not pity, not dismissal. Just trust. The bus driver glanced at her through the foggy glass, waiting only a moment before shutting the doors. The engine roared, and the vehicle pulled away, splashing water against the curb as it vanished down the street. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She had made her choice without words, simply by not moving. The boy's hand was still in hers, and she clutched it tighter, afraid that if she let go, the night would swallow him up. A strange warmth bloomed in her chest, fragile but real, and it pushed back against the endless cold that had lived inside her for so long. The rain came down heavier, dripping from the edge of the shelter, but she no longer noticed. The boy leaned against her side, small body pressing into hers with quiet certainty. It was such a simple gesture, yet it anchored her like nothing else had in years. "Are you staying?" he asked softly, as though afraid the question might break the fragile thread between them. She looked at him, the corners of her lips trembling with the beginnings of something she hadn't felt in forever, a smile. "Yes," she whispered, her voice shaky but sure. The boy nodded, satisfied, and rested his head against her shoulder. He sighed deeply, like a child finally safe after wandering too long. The weight of him against her was light, yet it grounded her more firmly than the bench beneath her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel like running. She didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like nothing. The rain kept falling, buses kept roaring past, cars sped through the wet night, but none of it mattered. She had chosen to stay, and in that choice, something inside her shifted. She had no roof, no money, no certainty of tomorrow. But she had a hand in hers, warm and real, and in the hollow of her heart, a spark flickered, fragile, trembling, but alive. The night stretched long, the kind of night where minutes dragged heavy, stitched together by the steady hum of traffic and the endless patter of rain. Yet the girl no longer counted time. She sat on the cold bench with the boy pressed against her side, their hands still linked, as though letting go might undo the fragile bond that had just been born. She watched the world blur past. Cars hissing across wet asphalt, strangers rushing by with their umbrellas held low, too busy to notice two figures huddled in the bus shelter. Once, that invisibility would have hurt, would have reminded her of how far she had fallen. But now, it felt different. She wasn't invisible anymore. To one small boy with wide, trusting eyes, she was someone. The boy shifted against her, murmuring softly as his eyes fluttered shut. Exhaustion weighed down his little frame, and soon his breathing evened out into the rhythm of sleep. His stuffed rabbit slipped from his grasp, landing gently on her lap. She stared at it for a long moment, the frayed fabric, the missing button eye. It was the only thing he had in the world, and he had trusted her enough to let it fall from his hands. Carefully, she tucked it back into his arms, then drew her own arm around him, holding him close. The rain slowed gradually, tapering off until only the sound of dripping water remained. The streets grew quieter, emptied of late-night noise. She tilted her head back, gazing up at the clouds breaking apart above the buildings. The dark sky lightened by degrees, a faint blush of pink and orange stretching timidly along the horizon. Dawn. She hadn't greeted a sunrise in years. Nights had always been her domain, hiding, surviving, waiting for another day she didn't want to face. But now, with the boy leaning on her, she found herself watching the sky with something she thought she had lost forever, hope. The boy stirred slightly, his hand tightening around hers in his sleep. She smiled faintly, brushing damp strands of hair from his forehead. "I've got you," she whispered, though he couldn't hear. The words surprised her. They were soft, gentle, spoken like a promise. A promise she hadn't known she could make. She thought of the question he had asked, "Can you be my mommy?" and her own answer, hesitant, fragile, but real, "Maybe I can." The idea terrified her. She had nothing to give him. No home, no meals, no safety to offer. She was a broken girl sitting at a bus stop with empty hands. And yet, his small hand in hers made her feel like she had more than she'd ever dreamed. The city around them began to stir. Workers in uniforms hurried down the sidewalks, street vendors pulled up carts, a bakery nearby let out the first warm scent of bread. She inhaled deeply, the smell flooding her with memories of mornings long gone. A pang of longing pressed against her chest, but alongside it came determination. She wouldn't let the boy go. Not now, not after he had looked at her, seen her, chosen her. "Can you be my mommy?" he had whispered. She had thought the world had finished with her, but in that moment, she understood, it wasn't over. The story wasn't done. The first sunlight touched the edge of the bus stop roof, spilling gold across the pavement. She sat up straighter, cradling the boy closer. Whatever came next, whatever battles the world threw at her, she would face them. Not as nothing, not as a shadow, but as someone who had been given a reason to stand. She looked down at him, his lashes dark against his cheeks, his lips parted in sleep. Gently, she whispered into the still morning air, "You're not alone anymore. Neither of us are." And with that, she held on tighter. For the first time, the dawn felt like a beginning.